Today, we're going to look at the topic of clothing, fashion, and design. A lot of you probably look at this topic and think, why are we learning about clothes? There's something that I wear every single day and never even think about it. When we look at clothing, we need to look at not only what we wear, but why we wear it, and what textiles or fabric is the clothes that we wear made from. We also need to look at fashion and design. So how do we get the styles and types of clothing that we wear? Where does it come from? And who actually decides what is trendy and what is not? When we first start to look at clothing, it's important that we understand what fabric or textile is used to make the clothes that we wear. Naturally, you can put fabrics into two groups, natural fabrics and man-made fabrics. Natural fabrics are ones that occur naturally in nature. So we can look at plant-based fabrics and animal-based fabrics. Plant-based fabrics include cotton, which comes from the cotton plant, linen, which comes from the linen plant, and hemp, which all have natural sources and are plant-based. Then we have animal-based fabrics, so things like wool. Wool not only comes from sheep, but also comes from other animals, such as rabbits, llamas, and even camels. Leather and suede also come from animals, and silk is unique in that it comes from the silkworm, and this makes it a very expensive and luxurious fabric. We also need to look at man-made fabrics. These are fabrics that are made in factories and in industry, and even though they are man-made, they can still sometimes come from natural sources. Polyester is one a lot of you have probably heard of before. Polyester is made from oil, the same oil that's used to heat your home and to power your car. So it's a byproduct of that. Rayon and viscose then may be something you might not have heard of before, but they use the leftover byproducts, such as sawdust, to actually make fabric. Another example would be acrylic. The reason I usually include acrylic here is because it's something your school jumpers are made of. Your school jumper, if you want to have a look at it and pause this video, is made of a mixture of wool and acrylic. Acrylic is essentially fake wool. So it's a plastic-based fabric that looks and acts like wool, but does not have the properties of wool that some people find uncomfortable, such as itching and giving your skin a rash. There are 6 main functions of clothing that we're going to look at over the next few slides. The first function of clothing is safety. Safety is a really important function of clothing because it protects you from any damage in your environment. Safety clothing is typically something that people wear in a job or in school. For example, when we bake, we wear aprons, which protects our clothes from spills or accidents. We also wear oven gloves, which protects our hands from being burnt. I've provided a number of examples of other safety-based clothing in the slide, which you can view now. Anything from steel toe cap boots to protect your toes, goggles that will protect your eyes, gloves that protect your hands, and even helmets that protect your head. Weather protection is a really important function of clothing. Clothing can prevent us from getting too cold or from getting too hot. Examples of clothing that help us from getting too cold, as you can see in the sample here, is the likes of a ski suit. But we don't have to go that extreme. It can be things like scarves, hats, and gloves that you might wear in the wintertime. Clothing also provides us with protection from the sun. Wearing sunglasses or hats, or even t-shirts, can also help us from getting sunburnt when we're in the sun. Clothing can also have a weather protection element from the rain, such as waterproof clothing such as wellies or waterproof coats. Clothing allows us to also protect our modesty. Modesty basically means covering the parts of you that if they were not covered, you may feel uncomfortable in your environment. The levels of modesty vary greatly between countries. In Ireland, for example, it is totally socially acceptable to walk around in the outfit the first girl is wearing. Whereas in other countries, it's more socially acceptable to cover more of your body. It's important that people are aware of the culture they live in when they're thinking about modesty. Also things like it's modest to wear a swimsuit at the beach, but it might not be modest to wear a swimsuit doing your food shopping. It's something that naturally happens or occurs to most of us, but it is something worth thinking about also. Clothing can help us to identify whether we are part of a particular group or work for a particular job. For example, when you wear your school uniform, you are identifying yourself as a student of the Mercy Secondary School in Waterford. Similarly, if you were walking down the street and you saw two men wearing Garda uniforms, you would know automatically that they are guards. Also, if you were in a hospital and you saw a woman or man wearing a nurse's outfit or a nurse's uniform, you would know automatically that they are a nurse. This function of identification can have huge benefits to our community. Clothing can also provide a level of hygiene. In the particular climate we are in at the moment, a lot of talk has been going around about hygiene and how clothing and how we can keep our personal hygiene at its highest. As you can see here from the examples of the images I've used, you can see three different types of hygienic clothing. Wearing a hairnet, whether you are working in a hospital or in a restaurant, can provide a level of hygiene. Wearing white scrubs or chef's uniform can also provide a level of hygiene. And the third example of wearing a surgical mask can prevent another level of hygiene in your clothing. The last function of clothing is self-expression. This is one that probably is most obvious to most of you. What do I like and what do I dislike? Basically, this means when I put on my clothes in the morning, what am I telling people about myself? Am I telling them that I'm a fan of a particular sports team? Am I telling them that I am part of a particular group, like goth? Or am I telling them that I associate myself with a particular culture, such as being a hipster? This level of self-expression varies among people, and some people just like to fit in. Next, we're going to look at fashion and design. Fashion is a word that's used to describe clothing or other items that are trendy at a particular time. What I always say is, have you ever looked back at photos of when you were a child, or even just a few years ago, and thought, why am I wearing that? The reason why you were probably wearing it at the time was because it was in fashion then. But fashion is constantly changing. What you like today, next week you might not like at all. And that's why we have a culture, in Ireland particularly, of what's called fast fashion. This means that we buy clothes that are cheap and inexpensive, mean that we might only wear them a few times, and then discard them. Fashion fads are short-term fashion trends. This means things that you might like or might be in fashion, but only for a short period of time. Weeks, months, and maybe even a few years. Typically, these also go in cycles. Have you ever had somebody comment, usually an older person, wow, I used to wear that when I was your age. This means that just because something was in fashion 20, 30, or 40 years ago doesn't mean it will never be in fashion again. And this means that things that your grandparents might have wore might be something that you will wear in the future. The example that I've included here in the slide is drain pipe jeans, something that we would now refer to as skinny leg jeans. They look the same, they act the same, but just different names for what is ultimately the same item of clothing. Fashion trends are influenced by a lot of different things. I've included some examples here on this slide. The first and most important one is probably the fashion industry. We will look at this in detail in a second. The second one that I think a lot of you will relate to is famous people and the media. What famous people or celebrities wear will often and ultimately influence what we will wear. Historical events in the economy can also have an impact on fashion. So just because the economy is on a downturn, maybe more people might be into recycling or upcycling clothing rather than buying new. Technology is something we'll also look at. Technology is always developing, and how we can use technology and fashion together is a really interesting thing that we will look at later on. How the fashion industry influences fashion trends is something a lot of you may have thought about before, or maybe have some level of familiarity about, but for those who don't, I'll go through it now. What basically happens is twice a year, fashion shows are held in Paris, London, New York, and Milan. These usually go for spring, summer, and autumn, winter. The clothes that are made or shown at these fashion shows are what's called haute couture. Haute couture are handmade, one-of-a-kind, very expensive clothing, anywhere from 25,000 for a suit, but upwards to millions. The fashion industry then is run by top designers. Some of these you may have heard before are Prada, Versace, Christian Dior, just to name a few. They then, after the haute couture designs, design what's called pret-a-porter. Those of you who do French will know this means ready to wear. These clothes are still very expensive and only available in designer boutiques, but are a lot cheaper than the haute couture fashion. What happens then is chain stores such as Penneys, River Island, H&M, Zara or Dunnes take these pret-a-porter designs and make them off-the-peg clothes. They take influence and sometimes even directly copy these designs to make affordable purchases for the everyday consumer. Here I've included a design of a dress all the way from haute couture down to pret-a-porter and all the way down then to off-the-peg. You might be able to see some of the influences of the design going down through all three dresses. The haute couture dress probably cost maybe 100,000. The designer then made a pret-a-porter gown very similar or taking some elements of it, depending on how far they wanted to go. Then everyday shop designers that we would buy from took the dress and made it more affordable and only took elements of the design. But you can see some similarities from the haute couture, the pret-a-porter and the off-the-peg clothing. The next influence I want to talk about is famous people. They have a huge influence on the clothing they wear. The award season that we have in January, such as the Oscars or the Golden Globes, gives designers an opportunity to display their designs to millions of people all over the world. While not everybody will watch the high fashion shows in Paris, Milan, New York, a lot of people will tune into celebrity news and see the designs that these people are wearing. This gives a major influence going forward then to what colours, shapes and designs we will be wearing ultimately the following year. Fashion trends can also be influenced by major events and the world economy. We'll be looking at some of these events in the following slides and seeing how they had an influence on fashion. The first comparison I've included here is that during World War II, fabric became very scarce, and as a result, skirts that normally would have been long, nearly down to your ankles, became shorter to the knee to save fabric. Another thing a lot of you may have heard of before was that women could not afford to buy silk tights. Silk is a very expensive fabric and would have had to be imported long distances for it to be made into tights. What they used to do instead was use gravy on their legs to give them a colour, and then using a black pen or marker, draw a line up the back of their legs to give themselves the seam. This is something that we can see in comparison today. Basically, they were using gravy as fake tan. During times of economic recession, which basically means when the economy is not doing very well, in England and in some places in Europe, an aggressive anti-establishment fashion became more popular. Anti-establishment basically meant that they were trying to go against the norm or what was seen as typical for the time. This led to the emergence of what we would know as punks, which are the people at the top there with the mohawks, and goth culture. Technology can also have a huge influence on fashion trends. New fabrics are constantly being developed, which make clothing more comfortable and more functional for us. Not only do we need to think about fabric when we talk about technology and fashion, but you can also think about wearable technology. Accessories such as watches, as Fitbit or Apple watches, they are also wearable fashion and wearable technology. So it's something that's influenced a lot of our lives. The final influence on fashion we're going to look at is social media. Nowadays, brands use influencers or bloggers to advertise their clothing and their fashion designs. They are often paid for this work, so that's something you need to consider when you are buying clothing that they are advertising. When buying clothes, many things can influence your choice. How much money you have, what age you are, and what the current fashion trends, to name a few. Here are a list of some of those. No 3. There are many factors to consider when you are buying clothing. Cost is probably the one most people think of first. But there are a number of other things you should also consider. Does it suit my figure, my hair colour and my skin colour? And also have a look at the care label and see, how do you wash this item of clothing? Does it need to be washed in a washing machine, or do you have to bring it to a dry cleaners? The last thing that you should also consider is the occasion in which you are going to. Accessories are something that's usually added to complete an outfit. There is many different types of accessories you can choose from. Anything from jewelleries, belts, hats, shoes and handbags. Some fashion accessories also have an additional function, such as a bag being able to carry things. When choosing fashion accessories, it's important to choose them so they complement the outfit but do not overtake the overall look. When designing clothes, it's really important you look at the following elements. What function does the clothing need to have? Does it need to be waterproof? Does it need to be soft or comfortable? And also, and very importantly, it needs to look attractive and look good. There are a number of ecological issues linked with fashion. The first one we're going to look at is textile care. Textile care is how you look after your clothes. Nowadays, people wash and dry their clothing probably a little bit too much. It's important to consider if your clothes need to be washed before you put them in the washing machine. Washing machines use electricity and water, both of which are quite limited resources, and they should be considered before you put on a wash. Textiles use can also be an issue linked with fashion today. Many people experience fast fashion, where they wear something once or twice and then throw it away. This is not only bad for the environment, but it's also bad for the textiles industry. Things build up in landfill, which can cause pollution and other issues. Ethical issues is another thing we need to consider when we talk about textiles. Ethical means is something right or wrong. The two main issues that exist in the textile industry is to do with human rights and to do with animal rights. And we'll look at each of these in the following slides. Human rights is something that has become a huge issue in the textiles industry of recent years. Many textiles can be produced for labour that's not paid for properly, or sometimes even by child labour. The conditions these workers have to go through every day is unfair, unsafe and unhygienic. This does bring down the cost of the clothing that we receive, but it's the cost of human life. Workers in the textiles industry can sometimes feel they have no rights. They work for very little money and are punished for not reaching quotas. What quota means is most workers will be expected to make a particular amount or number of clothing on their shift. If they do not meet this, they may not get paid. Child labour, as we spoke about in the previous slide, is a huge issue. Children are forced to work in the textile industry, which means not only do they miss out on education, but they also miss out on their childhood. Being sustainable, as we know already, is the avoidance of using too much natural resources in order to maintain a balance. When we talk about sustainability in textiles, it's important that we use the terms reduce, repair, recycle when we are thinking about how we will get rid of or dispose of the clothing we no longer want. Upcycling is also a very popular option. On this slide, you will see some information about repairing your clothes and also reusing your clothes. Have a read through these. Make sure you note the explanation and the examples. On this slide, you'll see some information on recycling and upcycling textiles. Upcycling is something a lot of you may have taken part of as part of your Junior Cert CBA. And this is something you are very familiar with and definitely will know some examples of. On this slide, you will see some information about repurposing textiles. Repurposing means making something new out of something old. I've included some examples here of household textiles that can be repurposed to make something new.